welcome to Google.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so I loved reading this book, and definitely jumped into this book with the perception that I think many folks might have, that the gig economy is this great thing that allows everybody to be their own boss and play by their own rules and so forth. And I think what you have done so powerfully here is really kind of unpack that. But why don't we, just to kick things off, start with the basics. What is the gig economy?
So that is a surprisingly controversial question. Like, people will fight about this for hours because some people think the gig economy is only kind of apps that give out jobs like Uber. Some people think it's all freelancers. Some people think it's kind of this shift away from full-time employment, whether that be contract workers or temp workers or other things that aren't traditional jobs. I think it's kind of just a buzzword used to describe kind of this set of companies that came up with this new idea of, like, well, which I said was a new idea. We can control kind of independent work through an app. In the book, I was looking at, like, how does technology impact this kind of long-term trend towards freelance workers.
Definitely a little bit more controversial than you would have thought. So maybe let's dig in on that technology piece a little bit. So how have all the advances that we've seen in technology impacted the gigging culture?
So let's see, I started kind of getting introduced to this topic and started looking at it when I was a tech blogger, and I was hearing 3 to 4 startups a day pitch me their companies. Maybe there are 3 or 4 of those still around today. I was in 2010, and I noticed kind of this pattern of pitch, which went something like, hey, like, we've created this app that's going to solve unemployment, because in 2010 that was still a problem. And it's also going to make everybody love their jobs. It's called Uber. It's called Uber for car washing, or it's called Uber for brushing your teeth, whatever. But now you can just press a button and you can get work. Problem solved. You're welcome. And I think kind of as that played out, and in the book I follow people's and in very different, like, positions within that world and how it plays out for them. But they found ways to take what had been kind of a totally independent, like, I'm my own business, which is something that totally exists and really is that kind of, like, great, like, work from the beach situation. But they found a way to make it, the same classification and still give people the responsibility of being in your own business, but actually in reality kind of manage you a little bit. It's also much easier to hire a freelancer than it's ever been before. There are these online platforms, there's easy ways to search. You can keep track of them. Like, some of these platforms have features where if you hire a freelancer, you can also watch a video of all the hours that they were working for you on their desktop to make sure that they didn't, like, check their email or something while they were supposed to be working for you. So there are all these things that kind of make it easier. And while, this has been a shift since the 70s, companies kind of outsourcing more and more of their work out to people who aren't their employees, I think that technology makes it easier in more situations.
What I love most about the book is that you brought us into the gig economy through stories of individuals who are sort of all interacting in very different ways with and participating in the gig economy in very different ways. So let's dig in a little bit to some of those stories, and I'll let you decide. The takeaway, I think, for me was that there's a lot to offer. Some are thriving, some are not, and there's just a lot more sort of nuance and challenges in this gig economy. So tell us about, maybe start with someone who's thriving. Tell us about Curtis.
Okay, so Curtis is a sophomore programmer. He just graduated from college. He went to work his full-time job for the first time, and realized it was super boring. Like, he was done with his work at noon, and he had nothing to do, so he like watched people play video games on the internet and like tried to pitch projects, but they went nowhere. So he was extremely frustrated and bored, and was looking for jobs, and ran across this platform called Gigster, which kind of doles out freelance jobs to independent contractors who are software developers. And he quit his job, joined this, and in his first month made like $12,000. Didn't have to go out and find clients or advertise or do any of the things that are normally associated with a small business. Totally loved it, got to pick his own projects, grew as an employee, and then ended up leaving the gig economy because he had kind of built his resume enough where he was able to land his dream job, which was at SpaceX. So, like, yeah.
So that's kind of, I think, maybe a little bit sort of
right. That's
like the gig
happy
economy
side.
Dream. But there were a lot of other stories that didn't quite turn out like that. So tell us about another person.
Sure. So Curtis's situation was kind of a specific, like, highly skilled professional situation, and I think a lot of what's happened is people who are promoting this kind of work for work that's not that have taken that narrative and said that's what it's like for also these people who are giving you rides or fixing your scooters or whatever it is, that is not highly paid professional work, which is, you know, not necessarily the case. So before Curtis quit to join the gig economy, he saved a year's worth of living expenses. He met with an accountant to see how much he had to save for taxes, and what else did he do? He bought health insurance. So he kind of created this like social safety net for himself. You know, if he got called to jury duty, which he did, and he couldn't work, he just moved his projects to next week. You know, it wasn't like he couldn't buy groceries. So for other people in these situations where you know, when you're working as a freelancer, you don't have any protections from like any labor laws, like not even discrimination or sexual harassment. You have no minimum wage, no right to unionize, which is a big one. And that's a much bigger problem if you don't have the power of a year's worth of savings. So there was this other project in rural Arkansas where a nonprofit kind of heard this pitch about you know, if opportunity isn't around you, you can just press a button and you can get connected with these gigs and have instant employment. And they thought, like, we'll take this to rural Arkansas, where the normal workforce development thing to do is build businesses, attract businesses to give jobs, but instead we'll teach people how to use the gig economy, and they'll get jobs that way. So I followed this project for 2 or 3 years, and the like false thinking of like we can make an app that fixes this problem became very apparent very quickly to everyone who was involved in it. Like, it works if you're a programmer to just download an app and use your skills, but that's not the problem for people who are, you know, 40% of whom are living in poverty in this small town. You know, they don't have like high-speed internet that works. They don't have educations that allow them to get jobs like social media consultant, where you need like perfect grammar and to be able to like gracefully meld like a sale into a punchy joke. So they just ended up applying and not getting anywhere. And I think at the end of the program, there was something like over 4 years, 4 people had gotten any work. One of whom I actually follow in this book, and you can cut me off if I'm
I think this is interesting.
But so the man from the program who I followed in the book, his name's Gary Foster, and the digital job he got was as a customer service representative for Sears. You remember Sears. And so his relationship to Sears was, you know, he would pick up the phone, be like, thanks for calling customer service at Sears. He was an independent contractor to a small business, and that small business had a contract with a call center that had a contract with Sears. So that's a lot of layers, to the point where, you know, if something happens to him, Sears is not going to be like, oh yeah, that was our employee. They're going to be like, I don't know who that guy is. You know, he had questions about his check, and he was afraid to like say anything because he knew that there was nothing protecting him from wrongful termination. And then when they required him to take a 3-week class to train, which his instructor had negotiated that he wouldn't have to pay for, because usually you would have to pay for the training class for 3 weeks that you would take in order to work. But he wasn't making any money, and so you know, he wasn't paying his bills. Yeah. There's also kind of like a questionable flexibility, because the pitch is you can work whenever you want, but if you're doing something like customer service, how you get hours is whenever they have hours available. And so they kind of like release the hours onto this platform, and everyone scrambles to pick them up as quick as they can anytime they're available. So if that's 20 hours this week, like that's great. It might only be 4, and you didn't get another job because, you know, you thought you were going to work 20. So
I think this rural Arkansas example sort of definitely highlighted certainly a lot of the pitfalls and challenges of the gig economy. But I think Terrence, who was this sort of was the guy who kind of said, let's give this a try. Let's see if I can make this gig thing work in my small rural hometown that is challenged and is on such hard times. Do you think there's any hope? Did you walk away from that saying, no, this is just never going to be able to, you know, this is great for the Curtises of the world, but not for small rural towns where there just aren't enough jobs?
I think it could be better. You know, most of, you know, the fact that we've structured everything around this 9-to-5 job, there's a lot of flaws in that. You know, it's kind of built for a time when we thought an ideal family meant a man that goes to work all day and a woman who stays home and works all day for free. And to the extent that that was ever the case, that is very much no longer the case. And that causes, you know, this idea everyone should work on the same schedule, it causes a lot of families a lot of stress. You have people who are going to school or doing other things that they want to work less than full-time. People are living longer and healthier, and maybe they don't, you know, if they're going to have a 60-year-long career, don't want to work full-time for that whole thing. So there are like definitely potentials for this. Also, like the need to work that way, technology is taking away a little bit too. Like you don't have to come to the office to get the files or to talk to people you're working with. More and more of the country doesn't have to go to work to like be in the assembly line. So there's a lot of potentials. It's just all of our structure is around this 9-to-5 job. So when that was created, which was a new thing at the time, coming from, you know, in the Industrial Revolution, coming from being distributed on farms, you know, we kind of screwed up at first. You know, we sent children to work, we locked people inside of factories that might burn down. Like, it was bad, but then we developed these structures, like labor laws and kind of social benefits that supported it. And we just don't have that at all for this kind of work.
So let's stay on that for a little while. I mean, where do you think? So the gig economy is marching on. It's just growing. All the data would point to the fact that this phenomenon is just getting bigger and bigger, and now policy needs to kind of catch up. What are your thoughts on some of the things that we need in that area?
Sure. So this is something that I think is interesting because when you talk about the gig economy, depending on your definition, you're talking about kind of a small set of people. But here's a place, I think, where if you solve some of their problems, you would solve other people's problems as well. So for instance, there's a lot of employees who are paying more and more for health insurance provided by their companies even every year. Or, you know, like their retirement savings are 401ks with the company instead of pensions, and they're accepting more risk and also feeling like tied to the company. So the big like idea for how to solve kind of the gig economy's problems is benefits should be portable. Either like everyone should have health insurance, or your health insurance shouldn't be tied to like your job. Maybe multiple employers can pay into it. Maybe it's housed with like a union or another entity. And so I think that's kind of like the leading idea for how to make things better. And the problem is like everyone can agree that that's a good idea, but they all mean totally different things when they say that's a good idea about like who pays for it and those kind of things.
Yeah. Have you seen any interesting developments or any progress against any of the ideas to support this?
There's a group of Democrats in the House that are campaigning for this idea, but again, short on details, which is really where it needs to be worked out. Like a union leader will say, like, what we mean is everyone will have a $15 minimum wage, everyone will have a full pension, and then you get the other side, which is like, great, companies will pay for nothing, and good luck. But we both support portable benefits. So a few details on that. One thing I think is interesting is the idea of, I really think that these are structural problems that we need to solve with policy. But one interesting idea, like aside from that, is having cooperatively owned platforms. So if your Uber driver owned part of the Uber app, they would benefit from this new like efficiency that they're creating by participating in Uber. And the same thing that makes it easy for kind of Uber to manage freelancers in this way could make a co-op a lot easier too. Like software scales. If I'm going to start a new Uber app, I can buy a white label solution for like $30 a month. And everybody knows what a white label solution is here, right? Because I'm in Google. If I want people to vote on everything I'm doing in the co-op, I don't have to like go door to door with my ballot. I can send them a push notification. So I think there's some promise in that idea.
Interesting. Getting back to the book for just a second, another story that I thought would be interesting to share with the group is the story of Christy, who I think was able to really benefit from the gig economy, but not without some tough consequences. Can you share her story with the folks here?
So I think she's a good example of, like, in some ways kind of being like a good thing that there's this opportunity that exists, but also still at the same time maybe not super fair or something we can be too proud of. How many of you know what Mechanical Turk is? Amazon Mechanical Turk? Everyone?
A lot of people.
Okay, awesome. So Christy, back during the recession.
I would explain it anyway. There might be some. Okay. Not all the hands went up.
So Amazon Mechanical Turk is this platform where companies can post small tasks, and then thousands of people pick them up and do them for maybe 5 cents or less a task. So an example might be like, I have 1,000 products on my e-commerce site, label each one every time you, or write a description for each one. Every time you do that, you win 5 cents. Or another very common thing that happens is label these images, which they're creating data for machine learning algorithms, which do I need to explain machine learning algorithms?
I think that maybe we're good on that.
I feel like you guys got that. All right. Usually I have to spend like 10 minutes explaining what that is. This is kind of fun. So Christy, her husband lost his job in a factory. She realized she has to make money. She's never worked outside the home before, really. Like, she has no resume. She's applied at McDonald's. They haven't called her back. So she logs on to Amazon Mechanical Turk, and because she is a genius, makes $40,000 a year, 5 cents at a time. And the way that she does this, it like involves all sorts of like really entrepreneurial thinking. Like, she set up, there was like a forum where people on Amazon Mechanical Turk alert each other of good jobs, which are ones that you can repeat really fast that pay well. and she had like an alarm on her computer that would go off like if someone posted there after they checked if she was qualified and could do the task. And it had like different levels of alarm for how good the job was. And she would like sleep in her office in case the alarm went off and she could like do this quickly. So all sorts of things like that. And so she did it, she like made the ends meet, but after a while, you know, you don't want to be like sleeping in your office and jumping up for an alarm. She like developed like a lot of injuries in her wrists and shoulders from like literally sitting at the computer. Like most of this work is very like you have to use a lot of keystrokes and a lot of mouse work, and you know, there's no workers' compensation insurance, so even though her job had hurt her, she had to keep working through it. She couldn't afford the medication to get surgery. So it was just, you know, for me kind of this, okay, great, like there was this opportunity, like I don't know how you would have made this money otherwise, but also like maybe we can do better than this. Yeah.
Yeah, a fascinating story of Christy. Let's like zoom out a little bit. You've shared some ideas of how you think you could make gig work a little bit more secure. What about just how is the gig economy impacting our culture?
So that's interesting. I think kind of this break away from directly employing your janitor and your bus driver and everything, that's been in the works for a long time. A lot of these apps that are part of the gig economy are also part of the on-demand economy, and certainly there's like a new immediacy with which people expect certain things, or certain people expect certain things. And then people talk about this like kind of surf culture in San Francisco when they talk about the gig economy.
What does that mean?
Like you have the people who make the apps and the people who work for the apps, and you know, it's become partly because of this labor system where labor is so cheap, and also you only pay for exactly how much you use. You know, it's never been less expensive to have, you know, a personal driver and someone who you can press a button on your phone and they'll come do your hair, and like it almost echoes this like royalty feudal system that we thought was like something for historical drama. I'm a big Downton Abbey fan.
Have you ever gigged?
So it depends which definition you're using. My book was technically a supplemental income gig economy assignment. I also, kind of where I started to get interested in the worker perspective of this was about 2 years after the startup blog and hearing kind of all these pitches about how I'd be like working from the beach and doing what I love whenever I want to. I pitched this sort of self-serving story to my editor at Fast Company, like, hey, why don't I take a month off and do this and see how it goes? And they said yes, and so I spent a month trying to beat minimum wage, signing up for I signed up for like 30 or 40 platforms, like everything from virtual personal assistants and TaskRabbits and dog walking and all of them. I had a class on Skillshare and I failed miserably. Like I thought it would be easier.
You weren't a good dog walker?
No one hired me. I guess and you know, like I write persuasively for a living, so I thought my profile was like pretty nice. I ended up like, I dissolved someone's LLC at the Harvard Club. I was in a proposal dance flash mob.
Okay.
And you can definitely tell which one is not trying to make it as a dancer in New York City. And I'm like, oh yeah, sachet. And let's see, I did so many ridiculous things. I like cleaned out people's closets and tutored their kids, and but it was really hard. And that was my first like realization of like, this is complicated for me, like college educated person with actual full-time job who's not relying on it. You know, it must not be the same story for everyone else, and that kind of led to this approach of like trying to find different windows of you know, perspective and places in this bigger world that we call the gig economy.
Fascinating. Yeah. As I mentioned, I think one of the things that I love about this book is how you bring this human face to it, the stories. can you tell us a little bit just sort of around the writing process? How did you find these people? How did you piece together these narratives? How did you choose who to bring into the book and who to leave out?
Yeah, so that was a good year trying to figure out. And I was looking for specific kind of perspectives that I had like data around that like showed the bigger picture, but I wanted to illustrate by putting a face to it. I think that it's important to tell stories that people can be engaged in and present people that they can care about instead of like a white paper version. And so I was looking for these certain people. Some of them I came across during my day-to-day reporting because I was still working as a reporter at Fast Company, and I just stayed in touch with them. Like Curtis, I met at a digital nomad work meetup on his first day. And then there were a lot of people who I began relationships with, thinking that they might be people I'd include in the book, who I didn't end up including for various reasons. Most of the people in the book were seeking attention for one reason or another. Some people, their lives became such that they really were not, and I, for the most part, respected that. But it's hard. You have to write about people in a way that allows other people to care about them. You really have to spend a lot of time. So in most cases, it was years of building relationships and talking to people about their entire life story, not just kind of this particular little part of it. Yeah.
It really comes through. Awesome. Okay. Questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you very much. You touched quite a bit on regulation and the lack of regulation, really. And some of the things that you mentioned, like multiple healthcare benefits, seem very US specific. I'm wondering if you've got any insights into how countries abroad are tackling this, because I feel like this is an issue that lots of different places are grappling with.
So various things. Some countries have a in-between classification. So in the U.S., you can either be an independent contractor, or you can be an employee. If you're an employee, you have all the rights and all the benefits, and your company has to pay all the money. And if you're an independent contractor, you have none of the rights and none of the benefits, and your company just has to pay you whatever they said your wage would be. Some companies have an in-between category where if you're a dependent contractor, you have some rights. So there's an in-between. Some countries in Africa, the gig economy is just the economy. Everybody's an entrepreneur. So this whole discussion probably seems absurd. And then some companies have taken a more active role in regulating, saying certain apps can't be here, or you have to set a minimum wage, which actually New York just set a minimum wage for Uber drivers. It's not exactly a minimum wage, it's an equation of what they have to make, but, and that's about all I have for that.
What amount of responsibility do the companies that create these gig ecosystems feel they have to their freelancers? I think Uber which is probably the biggest example, has a lot of language about this, but we're about people who just start something. Do they just think okay, if we build it, they will come, and we don't have to worry about it? Or do they? What's the landscape like there?
How much should they have, or how much do they think that they should have?
How much do they think they should have? How much? What are some good examples of good guys, bad guys?
Okay.
What's your thought on that?
I would say a lot of times, I think that it's somewhat of a, gets away from them in some way. They don't understand kind of the effect that this would have on people, or that even if it's great to be a freelancer as a software programmer, it might be different to be a freelance line cook or whatever. I do think that they're operating in a system that was fundamentally not built for what they're doing, and that kind of policy allows, the way policy is written kind of allows for this sort of in-between management, and that if things are going to make if we're gonna like make big changes that fix this problem, it needs to be kind of a policy-driven thing and not like a new app or like a new way to buy workers' compensation insurance for yourself because you know your company has no obligation to provide it to you. And so like I think individual companies can really only, you know, they should be good actors towards their own ecosystem, but like can't totally fix all the problems.
From the stories that you covered, to me there seems like this idea of like they're in survival mode, just trying to kind of make it day by day and figure out like how solving like short-term life planning. Like, do you get a sense that any of the people that you followed had a long-term perspective of like where they envision themselves in like 10 years, 20 years, where they like worry some about the future? Like, to me that just seems like a little bit of the backlash of like, of kind of like this big framework.
And I'd say like in the hierarchy of needs, if you're there because like this is what you need to do, then you think about your money first, and like health insurance only becomes a problem when you get in a car accident, and then it becomes a big problem. But there were people who, like the Uber driver who I follow in the book, Abe, he had for a long time been like obsessed with becoming a millionaire, and fallen for all these get-rich-quick schemes, which he kind of, when Uber made this pitch, like you can be your own business and you can like join like this echelon of entrepreneurs, he signed up. And yeah, today he still believes he's like going to be a millionaire, which I found really interesting because if you look at mobility in the US and think about why people join get-rich-quick schemes, you know, there's really, like it doesn't feel like if you work hard and you do this, if you're not coming from anywhere, that you're actually going to get ahead. It feels like you need that. So that was an interesting thing. And then like the people who are there by choice, I think it is an investment in their lifestyle and future and where they want to be.
In all of the people that you followed in your years of research, did you come across any like particular tools that are actually helping, that are really good resources that you encountered over and over? So like whether it's around healthcare or retirement planning or like non-payment protections or anything like that. I think like the thing about the gig economy is that it's not one industry, it's not one job type, so it's not like information's very fragmented, and even for freelancers and giggers, it's really hard to find this information. So just wondering if you found any companies, startups, or tools out there that kind of stood out from the rest.
I came across a lot of interesting ones, but I never came across one that like people who are working knew about and told me about. So I came across a lot of interesting ideas, but it didn't seem like they were being really like embraced or used. Like one interesting idea are savings tools, where a big problem is your income's variable. You don't know how much money you're going to make next week. So they take a bit, if you're having a good week, they take a bit of your income and save it. And then if you're having a bad week, they like pay it back to you. So it's an attempt at evening out the uncertainty in the income. But I didn't like actually find anybody who was using it. There's attempts to like break down insurance to make it like easier to buy as a freelancer, but again, like in the hierarchy of immediate needs, maybe that's not first on your mind if you're a freelancer. Yeah.
When it comes to labor in general, like if we look at it more historically, you know, being more focused on goods than services, you know, the structure which are being put in place focus on the goods production for the longest time. This gig economy sounds, you know, from all the examples that you listed, really focused to services today and only services. We know that services taking a lot more importance in the labor today. How do you foresee some of those things being able to be migrated back to the goods production, or are we going to have a split structure, one for the services, money and all these things, and another one which is going to be the archaic legacy level of things, exploiting workers?
This is an interesting question, because if you look at like Apple producing an iPhone, they have something like, I don't know, like 100 times, something ridiculous of people who work on the iPhone in different companies or on contract than they do employed in Cupertino. So like this fragmentation of work has already happened in the goods side of things in a way. You also have like temp workers and contract workers. There's some things about factories, which, like safety things, which make this a difficult, like having a new workforce every day is just not practical. But I don't know what the split is in terms of it being a totally different economy for services. Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
No, if I ask questions, I feel like when we start like talking about those things, we always think about the future, the evolution, or you know, the services-centric things. But we forget that, like, you know, in order like for us to eat, you know, here at the cafeteria, there's someone who's actually like growing some plants. There's some people which are actually, you know, building those chairs. You know, those are not at all even close to be part of any type of those working innovation that I know of. And I was wondering if it's a reflection which is happening, you know, within those people you've met, or if it's totally abstracted.
Yeah, I think I see like there's on the one hand like the big trend, which is, you know, like the decades-long trend of outsourcing, which is like, I don't want to hire my janitor, I want to hire the company that provides my janitor, or I don't want to hire people directly that work in my field. I'm going to like hire the temp workers to work in my field. And I think if you look at some of these basic things, you'll find it, but it's just what we're paying attention to is like Uber and this like very extreme version of that, which is I'm employing you for like literally when I get in your car to when I leave your car. And so it's almost like a hyper version of that.
One of the shifts that the gig economy brought is that you know, workers no longer get training as part of their jobs. How do you find these folks reflect on kind of the upskilling that they have to do all the time? Is this something they pursue on their own? Do they just not pursue jobs that they're qualified for? Like, how does education fit into this very different?
Yeah, that's interesting, because for some people I think it is like an upskilling, like they use it to like go build a resume by doing these freelance jobs. But on the other hand, there's like other types of work, which I don't know who said, like it's not a sector, it's like a management strategy is how I think of it, so it could be any kind of work. So some people use it as like an upskilling thing, but then there are others where there's no opportunity to really learn something new, and if you're not an employee that like belongs to the company, what incentive do they have to teach you how to do anything you don't already know how to do? I think you're seeing like a lot of companies try to solve this problem by offering like free online classes, or I think Salesforce, LinkedIn, Google, and a Fiverr, like this freelance platform, they all offer like online skills. You can take this class and you can show that you have this new skill. So the evolution of that I think will be interesting, and I don't know what will happen to it. But.
And I think another dimension to it is the need for upskilling, and then the gig economy allowing you to have that flexibility to work so that you can go to school and continue to skill up. So yeah, there's a lot of dimensions to that, the skilling conversation.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know the data around this, but the takeaway I'm getting from what I've heard and from what I've read is that the gig economy on average is not providing the wages that people think they might get by going into it, yet it's growing. So to what extent do you know the data behind, are people continuing in these jobs because, I mean, I know there's a lot of turnover, but like on average, are people continuing in these jobs because they are not finding full-time alternatives? To what extent are people looking for other options, or is it the flexibility is giving them enough value that it offsets the fact that they're not making more money?
I think one thing that's interesting about the data is a large portion of people are doing this part-time or like on a supplemental basis, which to me suggests, unemployment is very low, but like what does the quality of those jobs look like, and can people actually make ends meet on a job, or do they have to like do more? I think it's too soon to see data about whether now that unemployment is so low, will like fewer people be freelancers, will fewer people be doing this? But it's an interesting question.
I will throw in that as I was preparing for this talk, I came across this stat, which I almost couldn't believe, and I'm curious to get your take on it. In a recent survey commissioned by the online freelancing platform Upwork, and the Freelancers Union shows that the freelance workforce is growing 3 times faster than the overall U.S. workforce, and that the majority of people will be working independently by 2027, just like right around the corner.
Yeah, there's so much data, like it's so hard to quantify this.
Yeah.
Government agencies, different government agencies have suggested that the number of freelancers in the U.S. is anywhere between 10% to 40%.
It's a huge delta.
So Freelancers Union is asking, have you done freelance work this year? Which is a very different question than the BLS survey asks, was your main job this week of independent contractor work? And to which the person on the other end of the phone says, what's the main job? What's an independent contractor? I don't know if I'm classified as an independent contractor. Can I get you to hang up the phone? Sure. Like, yes, fine. That's what I am. Or no, I'm not. So it's hard to tell. Like people fight about this a lot. Like, what is the percentage? And I think it's almost a distracting question.
Yeah. So I think we're going to wrap up. I'd love to just end on, beyond the book, as you've been covering kind of the future of work, what are some other interesting trends that you see, or other sort of emerging hot topics in this interesting conversation about the future of work?
Yeah, so we don't know because it's in the future what will happen, but I think that how will technology change work is an interesting question, just like it was 100 years ago, and it will continue to be. And I think the culture of even like not being in the office is really interesting. Like maybe we'll all start to spread out more. But I don't have like a big thesis about like the future of work is chatbots or anything like that.
Anything that when you were writing this book surprised you?
I think the thing that surprised me is I started out with like, okay, Silicon Valley like had this idea and made this like, kind of guess or promise about what it would be. What does that look like? And then kind of that, just how big that question got, and to the point where you're like, okay, well then, there's this bigger trend of work moving this way in general, and risk moving to workers in general, and then like the history of work and the Industrial Revolution, and just kind of how much was packed into this one story about apps like Uber, and how much it touches other than like Uber, which is what we all talk about, which in a way is great because it brings attention to this issue, but it's much bigger than that.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys could join me in thanking Sarah Kessler for being with us here today.